Chapter 2, A Message to the Mayor. Lena often took different routes between school and home. Sometimes, just for variety, she'd go all the way around Spark Swallow Square, or way up by the shoe repair shops on Livery Street. But today, she took the shortest route because she was eager to get home and tell her news. She ran fast and easily through the streets of Ember. Every corner, every alley, every building was familiar to her. She always knew where she was, though most streets looked more or less the same. All of them were lined with old two-story stone buildings, the wood of their window frames and doors long unpainted. On the street level were shops. Above the shops were the apartments where people lived. Every building at the place where the wall met the roof was equipped with a row of floodlights, big cone-shaped lamps that cast a strong yellow glare. Stone walls, lighted windows, lumpy, muffled shapes of people, Lena flew by them. Her slender legs felt immensely strong, like the wood of a bow that flexes and springs. She darted around obstacles, broken furniture left for the trash heaps or for scavengers, stoves and refrigerators that were past repair, peddlers sitting on the pavement with their wares spread out around them. She leapt over cracks and potholes. When she came to Hafter Street, she slowed a little. This street was deep in shadow. 4 of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lena thought of the rumor she'd heard about light bulbs, that some kinds were completely gone. She was used to shortages of things. Everyone was, but not of light bulbs. If the bulbs for the street lamps ran out, the only lights would be inside the buildings. What would happen then? How could people find their way through the streets in the dark? Somewhere inside her, a black worm of dread stirred. She thought about Dune's outburst in class. Could things really be as bad as he said? She didn't want to believe it. She pushed the thought away. As she turned onto Budlow Street, she sped up again. She passed a line of customers waiting to get into the vegetable market, their shopping bags draped over their arms. At the corner of Oliver Street, she dodged a group of washers trudging along with bags of laundry and some movers carrying away a broken table. She passed a street sweeper shoving dust around with his broom. I am so lucky, she thought, to have the job I want, and because of Dune Harrow, of all people. When they were younger, Lena and Dune had been friends. Together, they had explored the back alleys and dimly lit edges of the city. But in their 4th year of school, they had begun to grow apart. It started one day during the hour of free time, when the children in their class were playing on the front steps of the school. I can go down 3 steps at a time, someone would boast. I can hop down on 1 foot, someone else would say. The others would chime in. I can do a handstand against the pillar. I can leapfrog over the trash can. As soon as one child did something, all the rest would do it too to prove they could. Lena could do it all, even when the dares got wilder. She yelled out the wildest one of all. I can climb the light pole. For a second, everyone just stared at her, but Lena dashed across the street, took off her shoes and socks, and wrapped herself around the cold metal of the pole. Pushing with her bare feet, she inched upward. She didn't get very far before she lost her grip and fell back down. The children laughed, and so did she. I didn't say I'd climb to the top, she explained. I just said I'd climb it. The others swarmed forward to try. Lizzie wouldn't take off her socks. Her feet were too cold, she said. So she kept sliding back. 40 Penn wasn't strong enough to get more than a foot off the ground. Next came Dune. He took his shoes and socks off and placed them neatly at the foot of the pole. Then he announced in his serious way, "I'm going to the top." He clasped the pole and started upward, pushing with his feet, his knees sticking out to the sides. He pulled himself upward, pushed again. He was higher now than Lena had been. But suddenly his hand slid, and he came plummeting down. He landed on his bottom with his legs poking up in the air. Lena laughed. She shouldn't have. He might have been hurt, but he looked so funny that she couldn't help it. He wasn't hurt. He could have jumped up, grinned, and walked away, but Dune didn't take things lightly. When he heard Lena and the others laughing, his face darkened. His temper rose in him like hot water. "Don't you dare laugh at me," he said to Lena. "I did better than you did. That was a stupid idea anyway. Stupid, stupid idea to climb that pole." And as he was shouting, red in the face, their teacher, Mrs. Polster, came out onto the steps and saw him. She took him by the shirt collar to the school director's office, where he got a scolding he didn't think he deserved. After that day, Lena and Dune barely looked at each other when they passed in the hallway. At first, it was because they were fuming about what had happened. Dune didn't like being laughed at. Lena didn't like being shouted at. After a while, the memory of the light pole incident faded, but by then they had got out of the habit of friendship. By the time they were 12, they knew each other only as classmates. Lena was friends with Vindy Chance, Orly Gordon, and most of all, red-haired Lizzie Biscoe, who could run almost as fast as Lena and could talk 3 times faster. Now, as Lena sped toward home, she felt immensely grateful to Dune and hoped he'd come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd be friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouses. Clary waved to her and called out, "What job?" And Lena called back, "Messenger!" and ran on. Lena lived in Quilliam Square, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm a messenger!" Granny's shop had once been a tidy place where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in the cubbyholes that lined the walls. All the yarn and thread came from old clothes that had gotten too shabby to be worn. Granny unraveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into balls and the thread onto spools, and people bought them to use in making new clothes. These days, the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangled out of the cubbyholes, and the browns and grays and purples were mixed in with the ochres and olive greens and dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend half an hour unsnarling the rust-red yarn from the mud brown, or trying to fish out the end of a thread from a tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days she just dozed behind the counter in her rocking chair. That's where she was when Lena burst in with her news. Lena saw that Granny had forgotten to knot up her hair that morning. It was standing out from her head in a wild white frizz. Granny stood up, looked puzzled. "You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But Granny, today was assignment day. I got my job, and I'm a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up, and she slapped her hand down on the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger, that's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lena's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and round brown eyes. At the top of her head was a sprig of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lena's knees. "Lena, Lena," she said. Lena bent over and took the child's hands. "Poppy, your big sister got a good job. Are you happy, Poppy? Are you proud of me?" Poppy said something that sounded like, "Hoppy, hoppy, hoppy." Lena laughed, hoisted her up, and danced with her around the shop. Lena loved her little sister so much that it was like an ache under her ribs. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coughing sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother, giving birth to Poppy, had died too. Lena missed her parents with an ache that was as strong as what she felt for Poppy, only it was a hollow feeling instead of a full one. "When do you start?" asked Granny. "Tomorrow," said Lena. "I report to the messenger's station at 8 o'clock. "You'll be a famous messenger," said Granny, "fast and famous." Taking Poppy with her, Lena went out of the shop and climbed the stairs to their apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that had belonged to Lena's parents, her grandparents, and even their grandparents. Old, broken, cracked, threadbare things that had been patched and repaired dozens or hundreds of times. People in Ember rarely threw anything away. They made the best possible use of what they had. In Lena's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft but uneven underfoot. Against one wall squatted a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs, and on the couch were blankets and pillows. So many that you had to toss some on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood 2 wobbly tables that held a clutter of plates and bottles, cups and bowls, unmatching forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of string wound up in untidy wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the floor and 2 short ones that stood on tables. And in uneven lines up near the ceiling were hooks that held coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans, jars with unreadable labels, and boxes of buttons and pins and tacks. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. A label from a can of peaches, a few dried yellow squash flowers, a strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings too. Lena had done the drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked somewhat like Ember, except that its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lena retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures. Over and over, she'd drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as seen from afar. Sometimes she chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put in stairways and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which the people of the city greeted her when she arrived, the first person they had ever seen to come from elsewhere. They argued with each other about who should be the first to invite her home. Lena could see this city so clearly in her mind she almost believed it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though. The book of the City of Ember, which all children studied in school, taught otherwise. The City of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders, the book said. It is the only light in the dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions. Lena had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lena wanted the other city to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful and it seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked and was used to store glasses and dishes so Poppy couldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a long row of cans. Lena tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled "baby drink" and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into a cup and the carrots into a little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For the moment, Lena felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Poppy's chin. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lena arrived the next morning, she was greeted by Messenger Captain Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said Captain Fleary to the other messengers, a cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lena. "I have your jacket right here," said the captain. She handed Lena a red jacket like the one all messengers wore. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep, reverberating bong. 8 o'clock, cried Captain Fleary. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations!" As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lena. "Your station," she said, "is Garn Square." Lena nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lena nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4. The captain went on. "Deliver a message only to the person it's meant for, no one else." Lena nodded again. She bounced a little on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleary smiled. "Go," she said, and Lena was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the window of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long, dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in their black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came into Garn Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer. It was old Natty Prime, calling to her from the bench where he always sat. "This goes to Ravenette Parsons, 18 Silverton Square," he said. "Bend down." She bent down so that her ear was close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broken. Don't come for dinner. Repeat." Lena repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Prime. He gave Lena 20 cents and she ran across the city to Silverton Square. There she found Ravenette Parsons, also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. "Old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't feel like cooking." No reply. Lena ran back to Garden Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lena there were more believers than ever these days. What they believed in, she didn't know, but it must make them happy. They were always smiling. Her next customer turned out to be Mrs. Polster, the teacher of the fourth year class. In Mrs. Polster's class, they memorized passages from the book of the city of Ember every week. Mrs. Polster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. What you need to learn, children, she always said in her resonant, precise voice, is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference, here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence. You must always choose the right. In every situation, Mrs. Polster knew what the right choice was. Now here was Mrs. Polster again, looming over Lena and pronouncing her message. To Anisette Lafronde, 39 Hum Street, as follows, she said. My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat. It took Lena 3 tries to get this right. Uh-oh. A red dot for me, she said. Mrs. Polster did not seem to find this amusing. Lena had 19 customers that first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. I can't come on Tuesday. Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Please come and fix my front door. Others had messages that made no sense to her at all, like Mrs. Polster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know, and hidden alleyways, and little rooms in the backs of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Philenia Tower had the skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. I study it, she said when she saw Lena staring. I have to know how people are put together. At a house on Calloo Street, Lena delivered a message to a worried-looking man whose living room was completely dark. I'm saving on light bulbs, the man said. And when Lena took a message to the Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days the back room was used as a meeting place for people who like to converse about great subjects. Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time? She heard someone ask. Perhaps, answered someone else. There was a long silence. And then again, perhaps not. All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out, and she loved running. And even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her, walking with a sort of sideways lurch. He was an odd-looking person. He had a very long neck with a bump in the middle and teeth so big they looked as if they were trying to escape from his mouth. His black, bushy hair stuck out from his head in untidy tufts. I have a message for the mayor at the gathering hall, he said. He paused to let the importance of this be understood. The mayor, he said. Did you get that? I got it, said Lena. All right, listen carefully. Tell him, delivery at 8 from Looper. Repeat it back. Delivery at 8 from Looper, Lena repeated. It was an easy message. All right, no answer required. He handed her 20 cents and she sprinted away. The gathering hall occupied one entire side of Harkin Square, which was the city's central plaza. The square was paved with stone. It had a few benches bolted to the ground here and there, as well as a couple of kiosks for notices. Wide steps led up to the gathering hall, and fat columns framed its big door. The mayor's office was in the gathering hall. So were the offices of the clerks who kept track of which buildings had broken windows, what street lamps needed repair, and the number of people in the city. There was the office of the timekeeper, who was in charge of the town clock, and there were offices for the guards who enforced the laws of Ember, now and then putting pickpockets or people who got in fights into the prison room. A small one-story structure with a sloping roof that jutted out from one side of the building. Lena ran up the steps and through the door into a broad hallway. On the left was a desk, and at the desk sat a guard. Barton Snowd, assistant guard, said a badge on his chest. He was a big man with wide shoulders, brawny arms, and a thick neck, but his head looked as if it didn't belong to his body. It was small and round and topped with a fuzz of extremely short hair. His lower jaw jutted out and moved a little from side to side as if he were chewing on something. When he saw Lena, his jaw stopped moving for a moment, and his lips curled upward in a very small smile. "Good day," he said. "What business brings you here today?" "I have a message for the mayor." Very good, very good." Barton Snowd heaved himself to his feet. "Step this way." He led Lena down the corridor and opened a door marked Reception Room. "Wait here, please," he said. "The mayor is in his basement office on private business, but he will be up shortly." Lena went inside. "I'll notify the mayor," said Barton Snowd. "Please have a seat. The mayor will be right with you, or pretty soon." He left, closing the door behind him. A second later, the door opened again and the guard's small fuzzy head reappeared. "What is the message?" he asked. "I have to give it to the mayor in person," said Lena. Of course," said the guard. The door closed again. He doesn't seem very sure about things, Lena thought. Maybe he's new at his job. The reception room was shabby, but Lena could tell that it had once been impressive. The walls were dark red with brownish patches where the paint was peeling away. In the right-hand wall was a closed door. An ugly brown carpet lay on the floor, and on it stood a large armchair covered in itchy-looking red material, and several smaller chairs. A small table held a teapot and some cups, and a larger table in the middle of the room displayed a copy of the Book of the City of Ember, lying open as if someone were going to read from it. Portraits of all the mayors of the city since the beginning of time hung on the walls, staring solemnly from behind pieces of old window glass. Lena sat in the big armchair and waited. No one came. She got up and wandered around the room. She bent over the Book of the City of Ember and read a few sentences. "The citizens of Ember may not have luxuries, but the foresight of the builders who filled the storerooms at the beginning of time has ensured that they will always have enough. And enough is all that a person of wisdom needs." She flipped a few pages. "The gathering hall clock," she read, "measures the hours of night and day. It must never be allowed to run down. Without it, how would we know when to go to work and when to go to school? How would the light director know when to turn the lights on and when to turn them off again? It is the job of the timekeeper to wind the clock every week and to place the date sign in Harkin Square every day. The timekeeper must perform these duties faithfully." Lena knew that not all timekeepers were as faithful as they should be. She'd heard of one some years ago who often forgot to change the date sign so that it might say Wednesday, week 38, year 227 for several days in a row. There had even been timekeepers who forgot to wind the clock so that it might stand at noon or at midnight for hours at a time, causing a very long day or a very long night. The result was that no one really knew anymore exactly what day of the week it was or exactly how many years it had been since the building of the city. They called this the year 241, but it might have been 245 or 239 or 250. As long as the clock's deep boom rang out every hour and the lights went on and off more or less regularly, it didn't seem to matter. Lena left the book and examined the pictures of the mayors. The seventh mayor, Pod Morthwart, was her great-great, she didn't know how many greats, grandfather. He looked quite dreary, Lena thought. His cheeks were long and hollow, his mouth turned down at the corners, and there was a lost look in his eyes. The picture she liked best was of the fourth mayor, Jane Larkett, who had a serene smile and fuzzy black hair. Still no one came. She heard no sounds from the hallway. Maybe they'd forgotten her. Lena went over to the closed door in the right-hand wall. She pulled it open and saw stairs going up. Maybe, while she waited, she'd just see where they went. She started upward. At the top of the first flight was a closed door. Carefully, she opened it. She saw another hallway and more closed doors. She shut the door and kept going. Her footsteps sounded loud on the wood, and she was afraid someone would hear her and come and scold her. No doubt she was not supposed to be here. But no one came, and she climbed on, passing another closed door. The gathering hall was the only building in Ember with 3 stories. She had always wanted to stand on its roof and look out at the city. Maybe from there it would be possible to see beyond the city into the unknown regions. If the bright city of her drawings really did exist, it would be out there somewhere. At the top of the stairs, she came to a door marked roof, and she pushed it open. Chilly air brushed against her skin. She was outside. Ahead of her was a flat gravel surface, and about 10 paces away, she could see the high wall of the clock tower. She went to the edge of the roof. From there, she could see the whole of Ember. Directly below was Harkin Square, where people were moving this way and that, all of them appearing from this top-down view, more round than tall. Beyond Harkin Square, the lighted windows of the buildings made checkered lines, yellow and black, row after row, in all directions. She tried to see farther, across the unknown regions, but she couldn't. At the edges of the city, the lights were so far away that they made a kind of haze. She could see nothing beyond them but blackness. She heard a shout from the square below. "Look!" came a small but piercing voice. "Someone on the roof!" She saw a few people stop and look up. "Oh, who is it? What's she doing up there?" someone cried. More people gathered until a crowd was standing on the steps of the gathering hall. "They see me," Lena thought, and it made her laugh. She waved at the crowd and did a few steps from the Bugfoot Scurry dance, which she'd learned on Clothing Square Dance Day. And they laughed and shouted some more. Then the door behind her burst open and a huge guard with a bushy black beard was suddenly running toward her. "Halt!" he shouted, though she wasn't going anywhere. He grabbed her by the arm. "What are you doing here?" "I was just curious," said Lena in her most innocent voice. "I wanted to see the city from the roof." She read the guard's name badge. It said, "Reg Stabmark, Chief Guard." "Curiosity leads to trouble," said Reg Stabmark. He peered down at the crowd. "You have caused a commotion." He pulled her toward the door and hustled her down all 3 flights of stairs. When they came out into the waiting room, Barton Snowd was standing there looking flustered, his jaw twitching from side to side. Next to him was the mayor. "A child, causing trouble, Mayor Cole," said the chief guard. The mayor glared at her. "I recall your face from assignment day. Shame! Disgracing yourself in your new job." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," said Lena. "I was looking for you so I could deliver a message." "Shall we put her in the prison room for a day or 2? Asked the chief guard. The mayor frowned. He pondered a moment. "What is the message?" he said. He bent down so that Lena could speak into his ear. She noticed that he smelled a little like overcooked turnips. Delivery at 8, Lena whispered, from Looper. The mayor smiled a tight little smile. He turned to the guard. Just a child's antics, he said. We will let it go this time. From now on, he said to Lena, behave yourself. Yes, Mr. Mayor, said Lena. And you, said the mayor, turning to the assistant guard and shaking a thick finger at him. Watch visitors much more carefully. Barton Snow blinked and nodded. Lena ran for the door. Outside, a small crowd was still standing by the steps. A few of them cheered as Lena came out. Others frowned at her and muttered words like mischief, silliness, and show off. Lena felt embarrassed suddenly. She hadn't meant to show off. She hurried past, out into Otterville Street, and started to run. She didn't see Dune, who was among those watching her. He had been on his way home from his first day in the pipeworks when he'd come across the cluster of people gazing up at the roof of the gathering hall and laughing. He was tired and chilly. The bottoms of his pants legs were wet and mud clung to his shoes and smeared his hands. When he raised his eyes and saw the small figure next to the clock tower, he realized right away that it was Lena. He saw her raise her arm and wave and hop about, and for a second, he wondered what it would be like to be up there looking out over the whole city laughing and waving. When Lena came down, he wanted to speak to her, but he knew he was filthy looking and that she would ask him questions he didn't want to answer. So he turned away. Walking fast, he headed for home.